to get back inside.
Let me in, man. There's some weird shit going on out here.
You keep dancing with the devil. One day he's gonna follow you home.
In 2025, a film called Sinners broke box office records, earned 16 Oscar nominations, and had audiences completely losing it in theaters worldwide. It made $370 million. It won Best Cinematography. People called it one of the most visually stunning films ever made. But this is what a movie looked like 100 years ago. Same art form, completely different world. So what actually happened between then and now? And the first place to start answering that is to ask people who've actually lived through it. We asked two of our teachers one simple question. What is the oldest film you've ever watched?
Wizard of Oz.
The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Positively, absolutely, undeniably, undeniably dead.
Two very different answers, two very different eras. And to understand why those films look the way they did, you need to understand the world that made them. Film didn't start as an art form, it started as a curiosity. In the late 1800s, moving images were basically a magic trick, a way to make photographs appear to come alive. Nobody had any idea it would become one of the most powerful forms of storytelling in human history. The earliest films were exactly that, just images. A camera placed in front of something real, recording it. There's no story, no angles, no editing, it's just footage. But filmmakers quickly started experimenting. In the 1920s, movements like the German Expressionism began pushing what film could actually do. Instead of just recording reality, directors started bending it. Distorted sets, extreme shadows, strange camera angles designed to make audiences feel uneasy, anxious, like something was deeply wrong. It wasn't about realism, it was about feeling. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, released in 1920, is one of the most famous examples of this. A film that looked like a nightmare on purpose. Then came the 1930s, what most people call Hollywood's golden age. And according to Britannica's History of Film, by 1930, just 8 studios control 95% of all American film production. MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox. These studios didn't just make films, they owned everything. The actors were under contract, the writers were under contract. Even the theaters were owned by the studios. It was one massive, incredibly efficient machine. And it produced some genuinely iconic work. Technicolor arrived, and suddenly films weren't just black and white anymore. They were almost aggressively vivid, saturated with color in a way nobody had ever seen on screen before. The Wizard of Oz, released in 1939, became one of the defining examples of that shift. A film that used color not just as a visual choice, but as a storytelling tool. Black and white for the real world, color for the fantasy. But alongside all that creativity came control. From 1934 to 1968, Hollywood operated under something called the Hays Code, a strict set of censorship rules that told filmmakers exactly what they could and couldn't put on screen. Crime couldn't be shown as something that pays off. Violence had limits. Even how relationships could be depicted was regulated. It shaped almost every film mode during this entire era. Then in the late 1960s and 70s, things broke open. The studio system lost its grip, and the Hays Code was gone. And a new generation of filmmakers, Coppola, Scorsese, Spielberg, Lucas, took over with a completely different approach. According to Encyclopedia's History of Hollywood, this era saw directors embrace bolder themes and new cinematic techniques, producing films that felt rawer, more personal, and more willing to go to uncomfortable places. This is the era that produced films like The Godfather, Taxi Driver, and eventually Jaws, which more or less accidentally invented the summer blockbuster, and Star Wars, which turned film into a global franchise machine. By the late 1980s and 2000s, technology had changed everything again. CGI arrived, cameras got lighter, more precise, more mobile. The way a film could look and sound was no longer limited by what you could physically build on set. And franchises like Lord of the Rings showed what was possible when you combine massive practical filmmaking with early digital effects. Which brings us back to our teachers. Because they didn't just tell us the oldest films they've seen, they told us the newest ones too. We asked them, what's the most recent film you've watched?
Yesterday we watched this film called Apocalypse Now, which is what it was filmed in like 1975 or 70 in the 70s.
One of the more recent films I have watched, and which is really dear to my heart, is Lord of the Rings.
Between the oldest and newest films each of them mentioned, decades passed. Entire movements in filmmaking came and went. And the gap between what those films looked like is hard to ignore. So we asked the obvious next question. Between the oldest film we watched and the newest, what's the biggest thing that changed?
I mean, specifically about Apocalypse Now, I guess the two movies are completely different. One's a sort of children's musical, and the second, Apocalypse Now, is a sort of grim tale of the, set in the Vietnam War setting. But the cinematography improved. I think just the feel of the movie changed. Cinematography is one that I could point towards. I'd say mainly that, like in terms of, the camera angles that are being used and sort of like how complex the storylines are.
It is remarkable to think about the journey from the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. We have this really kind of over the top, but even kind of stilted type of acting, arriving to Lord of the Rings, which is top notch in its acting, but it's more subdued, it's more subtle, because that has become the norm in screen acting. But you can still find elements of Dr. Caligari in Lord of the Rings, such as when Frodo or Gandalf are trying to kind of touch the ring. There is this horrific image of a ring of fire, and that is an element of German expressionism. So you can still find these little pieces of Dr. Caligari even in Lord of the Rings.
Two different answers, but pointing at the same thing. Film got dramatically better at feeling real. And to understand why, you have to look at what actually changed behind the camera. Early film cameras were enormous, heavy, and fixed. You pointed them at something and they recorded it. There was no such thing as a tracking shot, a crane shot, or a handheld close-up. Not because directors didn't want those things, but because the technology simply didn't allow it. The camera stayed still, the actors moved in front of it. Over time, cameras got smaller and lighter. Filmmakers could start moving them, putting them on cranes, on tracks, eventually holding them by hand. And that changed everything about how a story could be told. A low angle makes the character feel powerful. A close-up creates intimacy. A handheld shot creates chaos and tension. What used to take an entire theatrical stage to communicate now just takes one well-chosen camera angle. Then came the sensor revolution. Companies like Sony developed digital cinema cameras, the Sony Venus, the Sony FX series, that could capture light in ways film stock never could. Shooting in low light without losing image quality, capturing color with a precision and depth that made every frame look closer to how the human eye actually sees the world. Sinners, the film we opened with, was shot on a custom IMAX camera. Its cinematographer, Adam Durrell Arkapaw, used lighting setups specifically designed to capture the warmth of the 1930s Mississippi, the glow of a juke joint at night, the heat of the sun in the Delta. That level of technical control simply didn't exist for most of film history. And then there's CGI. Computer-generated imagery arrived properly in the early 1990s. Jurassic Park in 1993 was a moment most people point to it. And it removed the last physical limitation filmmakers had. You no longer needed to build a set. You no longer needed an army or a dragon or an alien world to actually exist. You could create it. Lord of the Rings used this to build entire civilizations. Sinners used it to create supernatural sequences that felt completely grounded in a real physical world. Film has always been a reflection of what was technically possible, what was culturally allowed, and what stories people needed to tell. Those three things keep changing, which means film will keep changing too. Whether that's improvement or just movement might depend on which seat you're sitting in.